Hi. Okay, let's start this again. Dissociative disorders, part two. I was talking about um, dissociative amnesia. I forgot myself. And this, is hard again to put your head around because the fact is, people don't know who they are. There's a story, a small community where a person was supposedly went out to get milk and he never returned. And the wife was really worried and called the cops, and they said, well, he might have a girlfriend. She says, I don't know, he doesn't have a girlfriend. And well, we had to wait 24 hours. They waited 24 hours, and they called, and he still didn't return. And finally, they called the FBI. And I know on TV they solved everything in 48 minutes, but they never found this guy. And no use of credit cards, couldn't find his car, and all this kind of stuff. And it went on for about 7 years, and finally, the wife tried to sue the insurance company for his insurance, life insurance, and they said, "Well, there's no body, we can't give you to it." And so finally, she had a great lawyer because she won this case without a body. I don't know how she did that. But then a couple years later, just about 30 miles away, we used to think they would go when they left the flight, that they would go like hundreds and hundreds of miles, but actually they stay in the same area, which is interesting. But anyway, somebody saw this man's picture, the businessman of the month, and it was his picture, of course, 10 years older, and she went with his parents and their kids and even the dog, and they went to find him, and they found him, and he was married, had a new family. He didn't know who the heck they were. And so then the insurance companies won their money back because he was still alive. And then they brought some psychiatrist in, and he said, he's not that person, he's this new person. And so, I mean, look, think about that. I mean, he drives away, he has in a wallet, and he doesn't know who he is. And he starts a whole new life because he tells people stories. But, if you met somebody and they told you they were from this place and blah, blah, you wouldn't believe them. So it's really remarkable to have the, complete loss. Now, we see this a little around campus because, the freshmen come in, especially the ones who've been sheltered or controlled or have no freedom at home. They get here and they go bonkers, and they do things, they drink, and they do all kinds of weird things they shouldn't do, but then they realize that's not them, and thank goodness they revert back to their true selves. But that little stage is what we're talking about. The other dissociative disorder is multiple personalities. We don't call that anymore. It's called DID, dissociative identity disorder. Why do we not call it multiple personality disorder? Because of TV. People like Oprah and these people, Dr. Oz and Dr. Phil, when they want ratings up, they bring in somebody that supposedly has multiple personalities, and the person comes and sits on the couch, and Dr. Phil will say, "Okay, be Bill," and he lowers his head and he comes back and he talks differently and he's Bill. Well, in a real life, that's the American Psychiatric Association. In real life, that's not true. Persons who have multiple personalities or DID do not know they have other alters. So you can't go call these other alters. And then once you know you have these alters, you just can't call them to show up. So that's all kind of bogus stuff, but that's TV. But anyway, so the American Psychiatric Association said, we can't explain this to the American people, so we'll just change the name to dissociative identity disorder, which is the same exact thing. Multiple personality is fairly rare. Some psychologists don't even believe it exists. There's about 125 to 150 cases supposedly verified. Obviously, there's more around American place. And some have up to 19 alters. Usually a little kid when things were not terrible. And the other one sometimes is a different gender. There's usually 83% have sexual abuse when they were young. Oh, you can see that can blow your mind. And so there is something like that. Now, on the test, I talked about the three faces of Eve, which you probably don't know, but it was a famous movie and a famous book. And there's a lady in Iowa who had three distinct personalities. And she was a librarian and very quiet, introverted, married to another introvert. They had a very quiet life, didn't do very much. Then for one other identity was her wild woman who was, went to bars and did all kinds of neat things. And then there was another one was more business oriented and a go-getter and that kind of thing. And nobody knew these three until a perfect storm. One day she was coming out of a store and one of her boyfriends called her by a different name, and then one of a person associate that worked with her called her by a different name, and then well, I don't know who you are and stuff. And finally, they put two and two together and called in a psychiatrist, and they came up with the three faces of Eve, which some psychologists believe it still wasn't identity disorder, but those are the identity disorders. Now, one of the identity disorders that no longer identity disorder is eating disorders. They used to be under dissociative because a person with anorexia nervosis does not see their true self. They don't see how skinny they are. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the eating disorders because there's on your homework on the test, it's eating disorder, anorexia neurosis, and there's bulimia. We're basically a female school, so it's very common. So you probably know some people that have this. Anorexia nervosa is an easy problem. It is people who won't eat. I once knew a person that had anorexia nervosa. She was on an IV. She would eat half a pea for lunch. And no matter who's skinny, I mean, I'm skinny, but she was super skinny. And when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see that. That's why it used to be a dissociative disorder. But now it's so common, they have their own category, eating disorders. Bulimia is where you overeat, you binge, and then you throw it up. Dentists are the first ones to kind of recognize this because of the acid on their teeth. So the deal is it's usually more common in women, but we do have men have both cases. And they have many of the symptoms that link to depression. So sometimes we misdiagnose it as major depression rather than an eating disorder. This is one of the few disorders that are linked somewhat to fathers. We always blame mothers for everything, but this one kind of linked to fathers because the idea of somewhere in line your dad is had this little seed that you are a little princess and you have to look this certain way, and so that thing. But the key is control. We had that in stress and health, remember? And a person who has anorexia nervosis or bulimia think the only thing they can control is their weight. And when we try to rehabilitate them and make them better, we're taking that control away, and that is very difficult. The success rate for these eating disorders is not very high because of the control issue. So, you have this ideal image in your head that you're trying to work for, and when you look in a mirror, that's not you. That what you see is not the reality. Hence, that's why it used to be a dissociative disorder, but now it has their own disorders. Okay, I'm going to end this now and pick up sexual disorders. So, see you soon. All right, bye-bye.